The grave that wasn't there. Yesterday, Ashcroft Cemetery sat on a low hill beyond the last houses in Bellweather, Ohio. For 137 years, it had remained almost unchanged. The same iron gates, the same leaning stone wall, the same narrow paths disappearing beneath old maple trees. Families had buried generations there. Soldiers, teachers, farmers, children whose names were spoken only in whispers. Nothing about the cemetery was remarkable. Until Sunday, October 6th. At 6:42 that morning, groundskeeper Walter Briggs unlocked the eastern gate. He was 68 years old and had worked at Ashcroft Cemetery for more than 3 decades. He knew every headstone, every damaged fence post, every patch of earth that sank after heavy rain. He even knew which graves attracted deer in winter. Walter noticed the new mound before he reached the tool shed. Fresh black soil, perfectly rectangular, positioned beneath an old sycamore tree near the northern wall. He stopped walking. For several seconds, he simply stared. There had been no burial scheduled, no excavation request, no funeral. More importantly, that section of the cemetery had been closed since 1954. Walter approached slowly. The grass around the grave was wet with morning dew, but the soil itself was dry. Not damp, not muddy. Dry and loose, as though it had been carried from somewhere else. At the head of the mound stood a simple gray marker. No flowers, no dates, no name. Only a small carved symbol. A circle divided by one vertical line. Walter had never seen it before. He called the cemetery office. No answer. He called the funeral director. Still no answer. Finally, he called Sheriff Helen Mercer. By 7:15, a patrol car rolled through the iron gates. Sheriff Mercer stepped out carrying a paper cup of coffee. 45 years old, dark coat, hair tied back, expression already irritated. Walter met her near the grave. "You said someone buried a body without permission. I said a grave appeared." Helen looked at him. "Graves don't appear." Walter pointed. "That one did." She walked around the mound twice. No tire tracks, no footprints, no drag marks, no displaced grass beyond the grave itself. The nearest maintenance road was almost 70 yards away. Anyone digging there would have needed tools, lights, and several hours. Someone should have heard something. The cemetery bordered 6 homes. 3 had dogs. None had barked. Helen crouched beside the soil. "How deep?" Walter swallowed. "I don't know. You didn't check?" "I was waiting for you." Helen looked toward the blank stone. "Good." She radioed Deputy Cole and requested crime scene tape. Then she called the county coroner. While waiting, she photographed the grave from every angle. The final photograph made her pause. On the screen, the stone appeared blank. No symbol. She looked up. The divided circle was clearly visible. She took another photograph. Again, blank stone. Walter noticed her expression. "What?" Helen turned the phone toward him. His face tightened. "The symbol's gone. It's still on the stone." "I know." At 8:03, Deputy Nathan Cole arrived with the coroner and 2 county workers. By then, church bells were ringing in town. Families began arriving to place flowers on graves. Helen closed the northern path and told everyone a water line had broken. Most believed her. One person did not. Dr. Evelyn Hart stood beyond the yellow tape. 71 years old, retired history professor, author of 3 books about Bellweather County. She had come to visit her husband's grave. Instead, she watched the workers prepare to open the new one. Helen approached. "This area is closed." Evelyn kept staring at the blank stone. "Who found it?" "Walter." "What time?" "Why?" Evelyn finally looked at her. "Because it wasn't here yesterday." Helen frowned. "How would you know?" "I was here yesterday." Evelyn pointed toward the sycamore tree. My parents are buried 30 feet from that spot. I visit every Saturday. There was no grave, no disturbed soil, and no marker. Helen studied her carefully. You're certain? I've been walking this cemetery since I was 6. I'm certain. The county workers began digging. Shovels entered the loose earth with almost no resistance. The first foot contained nothing. The second, still nothing. At 3 feet, one worker stopped. His shovel had struck wood. The coroner stepped forward. The workers cleared the remaining soil by hand. A coffin slowly emerged. Dark oak, old-fashioned brass handles. No scratches, no dirt stains. It looked newly built. Yet the design had not been used in the county for almost a century. Helen ordered everyone back. The coffin was lifted onto 2 support beams. The coroner inspected the lid. No manufacturer plate, no burial seal, no paperwork. Deputy Cole whispered, "Could be some kind of stunt." Walter shook his head. No one dug that grave last night. Cole looked toward the dark soil. Someone did. Walter answered quietly, "Then where are their footprints?" At 9:17, the coroner opened the coffin. Everyone expected a body. There wasn't one. Inside lay a black suit, white shirt, polished shoes, all carefully arranged as though worn by an invisible person. The clothing was old, but perfectly preserved. Resting on the chest was a silver pocket watch. Helen reached for it with a gloved hand. Evelyn shouted from behind the tape, "Don't touch that!" Everyone turned. Helen narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Evelyn stared at the watch. Her face had gone pale. "Because I've seen it before." Helen lifted the watch carefully. The silver case bore the same divided circle symbol as the gravestone. Unlike the symbol on the stone, this one appeared clearly in photographs. The watch had stopped at exactly 12:07. Inside the lid, someone had engraved a date. October 13th. 7 days away. Deputy Cole looked toward the empty coffin. "That doesn't mean anything." Evelyn stepped closer to the tape. "It means another grave will appear next Sunday." Helen looked at her. "How could you possibly know that?" Evelyn hesitated, then spoke so quietly that only those nearest could hear. "Because this happened once before." The wind moved through the sycamore branches. Dry leaves circled the open grave. Walter stared at the historian. "When?" Evelyn looked toward the oldest section of the cemetery. 1912. Silence. There were 7 graves. One appeared every Sunday, all empty, and after the 7th appeared, she stopped. Helen waited. What happened? Evelyn's eyes shifted toward the distant church steeple beyond the cemetery wall. 43 people disappeared from Bellweather in a single night. No one spoke. The coroner gently searched the suit pockets. The coat was empty. The trousers were empty. Then he found something inside the white shirt. Not in a pocket. Pinned directly over where the heart should have been. A small piece of folded paper. Helen opened it. Only one sentence had been typed. "The first grave is for the town." Below it, a second line had been added by hand, fresh black ink. "The second will be for Sheriff Helen Mercer." Helen stared at her own name. Behind her, the iron cemetery gates slammed shut. No one had touched them, and from somewhere beneath the open grave, a pocket watch began ticking. The second grave. No one moved. The iron gates had slammed shut with enough force to shake rust from their hinges. Every head turned toward the entrance. There was no one there. No visitor. No prankster. No gust of wind strong enough to explain what had just happened. Then, the ticking stopped. Silence settled over Ashcroft Cemetery once again. Sheriff Helen Mercer looked back toward the open coffin. The silver pocket watch rested exactly where she had placed it. Its hands remained frozen. 12:07. Deputy Nathan Cole frowned. "I thought, you heard it too?" Walter Briggs nodded slowly. "I've worked here 33 years. I know the sound of a pocket watch. The one in that coffin." Just started running. The county coroner reached inside. He carefully picked up the watch. Nothing. No movement. No ticking. He opened the case. The hands were still frozen. This mechanism is broken. Walter quietly whispered it wasn't. Helen folded the handwritten note into an evidence bag. Her own name stared back at her through the clear plastic. The second will be for Sheriff Helen Mercer. She had spent 20 years in law enforcement. Anonymous threats, letters, phone calls, every kind of intimidation imaginable. This felt different. Not because of the threat, because whoever wrote it already knew where the second grave would appear. By noon, state investigators had arrived. The cemetery entrance was sealed. Every nearby homeowner was interviewed. Security cameras from surrounding streets were collected. Nothing. No vehicles had entered after sunset. No pedestrians approached the northern wall. No lights appeared inside the cemetery all night. According to every piece of evidence, the grave should not exist. That afternoon, Professor Evelyn Hart requested permission to inspect the old cemetery archives. Helen agreed, mostly because she wanted to prove the elderly historian wrong. The two women descended into the basement beneath Bellweather's tiny historical society. Dust covered everything. Shelves leaned beneath decades of forgotten documents. Walter followed, carrying a flashlight. The building smelled of paper and rain. Evelyn stopped before a cabinet labeled Cemetery Records. She unlocked it with a brass key. Inside rested dozens of leather-bound ledgers. Births, deaths, burials, maintenance. Every recorded funeral since 1887. She removed one volume. Its spine read 1912. Walter placed the ledger on an old oak table. The pages crackled softly as Evelyn turned them. October. She stopped. Her hands began trembling. Helen stepped closer. "What is it?" Evelyn silently rotated the book. Across 7 consecutive Sundays, someone had drawn tiny pencil sketches beside the burial records. Not names, not graves. Small circles divided by a single vertical line. The same symbol carved into the mysterious headstone. Helen frowned. "Who drew these?" "I don't know. Were there actual burials?" Evelyn slowly shook her head. "No. None. The records are blank." Walter leaned closer. "Then why mark the dates?" Evelyn answered quietly. "Because someone knew." She turned one more page. The following Monday. Every entry stopped. No handwriting, no maintenance notes, nothing. Instead, one newspaper clipping had been folded into the ledger. Its headline read, 43 residents still missing. October 28th, 1912. No explanation. No suspects. No bodies. Bodies. Bellweather, simply. Lost 43 people. Helen stared at the clipping. How did this never become famous? Evelyn smiled sadly. It was. For about 2 weeks. She pointed toward another article beneath it. A much smaller headline. County declares mass relocation following mine closure. Helen frowned. That's not true. No, Evelyn replied. It isn't. Walter looked confused. So, someone covered it up. Evelyn nodded. Completely. Helen looked back toward the first article. One sentence had been circled in red ink decades earlier. Witnesses reported seeing freshly dug graves every Sunday before the disappearances began. The room fell silent. Walter quietly asked, "Who circled it?" Evelyn slowly turned the brittle page. On the back, one signature, not a name, only initials. H.M. Helen stared. My initials. Walter looked at her. You've never seen this before? Oh. Evelyn's face slowly drained of color. They aren't your initials. They belong to someone else. She opened another ledger. A staff registry from 1912. Her finger stopped beside one entry. Harold Mercer. Position, Sheriff of Bellweather County. Helen froze. My great-grandfather. Walter looked between them. The second grave, Helen finished the sentence, already knew my family. At that exact moment, Deputy Cole burst into the archive room, out of breath. "Sheriff!" Helen stood. "What happened?" Cole swallowed hard. "We've got another problem." He placed several printed photographs on the table. Helen recognized them immediately. The crime scene team had photographed every grave in the northern section that morning. Except, there was now one grave too many. The photographs showed 2 fresh mounds of earth. Not one. The second grave had not existed when investigators were standing there. It had appeared, between photographs taken less than 3 minutes apart, without anyone noticing. Walter whispered, "That's impossible." Cole nodded. "It gets worse." He slid over the final photograph, a close-up of the second headstone. Unlike the first, this one had words carved into it, perfectly sharp, perfectly clean. Helen read them aloud. Sheriff Helen Mercer. No birth date, no death date, only her name. The room became deathly still. Then Evelyn noticed something no one else had seen. At the bottom of the stone, barely visible beneath the carved name, someone had etched 6 tiny words. "Do not open the third grave." The warning on the stone, no one spoke. The photograph lay motionless on the archive table. Every investigator who had visited Ashcroft Cemetery that morning had sworn there was only one grave. Now, the evidence showed 2. The second headstone bore Sheriff Helen Mercer's name, and beneath it, 6 carefully carved words. "Do not open the third grave." Deputy Cole broke the silence. "I've already called the state police." Helen nodded absently. "They'll think the photos were altered. They already do." Cole looked exhausted. "They've requested the original camera files." Walter quietly asked, "Are they different?" Cole swallowed. "No. They show the same thing." Helen looked toward Evelyn. "You knew another grave would appear." "I suspected. You never said it would have my name." Evelyn slowly shook her head. "Because it didn't happen that way in 1912. "What happened?" "The names came later." Walter frowned. "So, history changed." Evelyn answered almost to herself. "Or, someone changed the rules." Within 20 minutes, the 4 of them returned to Ashcroft Cemetery. Rain clouds had gathered above Bellweather. The afternoon air felt strangely warm for October. The yellow crime scene tape still surrounded the northern section. Nothing appeared disturbed. No footprints. No machinery. No evidence anyone had entered. Yet, 2 fresh graves stood beneath the sycamore tree, perfectly aligned, exactly 6 feet apart. Helen approached the second headstone. Her own name stared back at her. The carving looked decades old. Rainwater had already settled naturally inside each letter. Walter knelt beside the stone. "It isn't fresh." Helen looked down. "What?" He touched the edge carefully. "The weathering. This should take years." Deputy Cole ran his fingers across the granite. "It feels—" He stopped. "Like it's always been here." Helen took another photograph. This time, the inscription appeared perfectly. Unlike the first stone, she photographed it again. Still there. Only the divided circle symbol remained invisible in every image. The county coroner arrived carrying ground-penetrating radar equipment. "If there's another coffin, we'll know before anyone digs." Helen looked toward the warning. "Do not open the third grave. We're opening this one." The radar unit passed slowly across the fresh mound. Everyone watched the monitor. A rectangular shape appeared, almost identical to the first grave. One coffin, approximately 6 feet below. The coroner nodded. "There's definitely something down there." Excavation began. Just like before. The soil offered almost no resistance, loose, dry, as though the earth wanted the grave uncovered. At exactly 3 feet, the shovel struck wood. Again. Walter whispered. "It's the same depth." The workers cleared away the remaining dirt. Another oak coffin emerged, identical to the first. Same brass handles, same age, same impossible condition. Helen looked toward Evelyn. "You still think I shouldn't open it?" Evelyn stared at the coffin. "I think someone wants you to." The words settled heavily over everyone. Helen stepped forward anyway. "Open it." The brass lid slowly lifted. Inside, no body. Again. Instead, a sheriff's uniform rested neatly inside. Dark brown. Bellweather County badge. Leather duty belt. Everything perfectly preserved. Even the polished boots. Deputy Cole frowned. "That's not yours." Helen nodded. "No. It's older." Walter leaned closer. "The badge." Helen looked carefully. The engraved name almost stopped her breathing. Harold Mercer, her great-grandfather, Sheriff of Bellweather. Missing 1912. Folded across the uniform lay another typed note. Helen unfolded it. The paper felt new. The ink smelled fresh. She read aloud. "The second grave remembers the first sheriff who failed." Silence. Below it, another handwritten sentence. "The third will remember the first child." Evelyn's eyes widened. "No." Walter looked at her. "What?" she whispered. "They've changed the order." Helen frowned. "What order?" "In 1912, the child came first, without warning." The silver badge pinned to Harold Mercer's uniform slipped loose. It struck the inside of the coffin with a sharp metallic sound. Clink. Everyone froze, because the sound echoed. Not once, not twice, dozens of times, as though dozens of badges were falling into dozens of coffins, somewhere beneath the cemetery. Walter slowly turned toward the oldest section of Ashcroft. Rows of weathered headstones stretched beneath gray skies. Nothing moved. Then, one crow suddenly took flight, followed by another. Then another. Within seconds, hundreds of black crows erupted into the air. Every bird had been resting in exactly the same place. The oldest graves. Deputy Cole looked upward. What scared them? Nobody answered, because everyone heard it. A low, rhythmic, thumping sound, not from above, from underground, slow, measured, like someone was knocking from inside dozens of coffins at once. The knocking stopped. Complete silence returned. Then Walter noticed something that made the color leave his face. He pointed toward the oldest row of headstones. "Helen." She followed his finger. Every gravestone in the oldest section had turned. Not fallen, not broken. Turned. Each stone now faced the northern wall, toward the place where the third grave had not yet appeared. The graves that turned. No one moved. Hundreds of weathered headstones faced the northern wall. Not one remained pointed toward the church. Not one faced its original direction. It looked as though the entire cemetery had turned to watch something. Deputy Cole finally whispered, "That's impossible." Walter slowly nodded. "I've repaired these stones for 33 years, some way over 1,000 pounds. No one could rotate them overnight." Helen quietly corrected him. "They didn't." Walter frowned. "What?" "They moved while we were standing here." The realization settled over everyone. Only moments earlier, every headstone had faced west. No one had heard stones scraping against earth. No cracking, no collapsing soil. The cemetery had changed. Silently. Professor Evelyn Hart walked toward the oldest graves. "Don't!" Helen grabbed her arm. "It could be dangerous." Evelyn gently pulled free. "It already is." She stopped before the oldest marker in Ashcroft Cemetery. The inscription had almost disappeared beneath a century of rain. Evelyn brushed away moss with trembling fingers. The name became visible. Elias Thorne. Born 1821. Died 1884. Bellweather's first gravedigger. Walter quietly spoke. He dug nearly every grave in this cemetery. Evelyn slowly nodded. And according to local folklore, he refused to bury empty coffins. Helen looked toward her. What does that have to do with this? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pointed toward the back of the stone. Someone had carved words no visitor should ever have seen, hidden from public view for more than a century. When the graves turn. The sentence stopped. The remaining stone had broken away decades earlier. Walter swallowed. There was more. Evelyn nodded. Someone removed it. The knocking returned. 3 slow impacts. From underground. Knock, knock, knock. This time, the sound came from beneath the oldest graves, not the new ones. Deputy Cole instinctively drew his sidearm. Helen lowered it. You can't arrest whatever's underground. Cole didn't smile. I wasn't planning to. Rain finally began falling, soft at first, then harder. Within minutes, water flowed across the cemetery paths. Yet something immediately caught Walter's attention. The fresh graves remained completely dry. Not a single raindrop touched the dark soil. The rain simply bent around them, as though refusing to fall there. Helen stepped closer. She extended one gloved hand over the first grave. Rain struck her sleeve, her shoulder, her hat. But beneath her open palm, nothing. A perfectly dry circle hovered above the fresh earth. She slowly pulled her hand away. The rain immediately filled the empty space. Walter whispered, I've never. His voice failed him. Back at the first grave. The silver pocket watch suddenly began ticking again. No one touched it. Tick, tick, tick. This time, its hands moved. 12:07, 12:08, 12:09. The broken mechanism had somehow repaired itself. The coroner stared. That watch is over 100 years old. It shouldn't even... He stopped. The second hand continued sweeping smoothly. Then it stopped again. Exactly at 12:13. Professor Hart closed her eyes. No. Helen turned sharply. You recognize that time? Evelyn nodded once. It wasn't in the newspaper. It wasn't in the archives. It was in my grandmother's diary. Walter looked stunned. Your grandmother survived 1912? Yes. She was 9. Silence. She wrote. Evelyn hesitated. At 12:13, the cemetery stopped waiting. Lightning flashed overhead. For a fraction of a second, every shadow disappeared, then returned, except one. Near the northern wall, a single human shadow remained standing, though no person stood there. Deputy Cole saw it first. Sheriff. Helen turned. The shadow stood perfectly still, roughly 6 feet tall. Hat, long coat, hands folded behind its back. No face. Only darkness. Walter whispered, Someone's there. Helen raised her flashlight. The beam crossed the empty grass. Nothing. She lowered it. The shadow remained. Impossible. Visible only where no light touched. The shadow slowly lifted one arm, not pointing at Helen, not at the graves, toward the oldest oak beside the cemetery wall. Walter frowned. There's nothing there. Professor Hart looked where the shadow pointed. Her face immediately turned pale. No. Helen looked back. What? Evelyn's voice barely rose above the rain. There used to be. She began walking, fast, ignoring everyone calling after her. She reached the ancient oak tree, dropped to her knees, and started digging through soaked leaves with both hands. Walter hurried over. What are you doing? Evelyn kept digging. My grandmother. She wrote about a stone. Helen arrived seconds later. What stone? Evelyn suddenly stopped. Her fingers had struck something solid. Not rock. Granite. She cleared away the last layer of wet leaves. A flat square marker emerged, completely hidden beneath decades of soil. No one had known it was there. No cemetery map mentioned it. No burial records listed it. Across the surface, only one sentence had been carved. The first child was never buried here. Silence. Then, below that, almost invisible beneath moss, a second line. Look under the church. Before anyone could react. The ground beneath the old oak shuddered violently. A deep crack split the earth between the hidden marker and the northern wall. Not wide enough to swallow anyone. Just wide enough for something long buried to slowly begin rising. At first, only the tip appeared. Black wood, polished brass, another coffin. Except this one was pushing itself out of the ground. The coffin that buried itself. No one breathed. The black coffin continued rising from the fractured earth. Not quickly, not violently. Slowly, as though invisible hands beneath the cemetery were carefully lifting it into daylight. The rain stopped. Instantly, clouds still covered the sky, yet not another drop fell. The entire cemetery had become unnaturally still. Walter Briggs took one careful step backward. I've buried over 2,000 people. His voice shook. I've never seen the ground. Give one back. The coffin finally came to rest above the surface, half buried, half exposed. Unlike the other two, this coffin was older, far older. Its oak had darkened almost to black. Iron straps reinforced every corner. The brass handles had turned green with age, yet there was no rot, no damage. It looked as though time itself had refused to touch it. Helen approached carefully. No one opens it. Professor Evelyn Hart immediately nodded. Not yet. Deputy Cole frowned. We opened the first two, and nothing happened. Evelyn slowly looked toward him. No. Everything happened. We simply haven't understood it yet. Walter knelt beside the exposed coffin. Something immediately caught his attention. This. He brushed Ma Beaumont away from one iron strap. Wasn't buried. Helen looked down. What do you mean? Walter pointed beneath the coffin. There isn't any displaced soil. Everyone stared. He was right. The earth beneath the coffin was perfectly solid. No burial shaft, no excavation, no loose dirt. The coffin hadn't been dug up. It had passed through the ground. Deputy Cole whispered, "That's impossible." Walter answered quietly. So were the other graves. Professor Hart slowly circled the coffin, then suddenly stopped. Her breathing became uneven. The lock. Helen looked. A massive iron lock secured the lid. Unlike modern padlocks, this one had no keyhole, only a circular depression, exactly the same size as the silver pocket watch. Walter slowly looked toward Helen. The watch. Helen already understood. It was never meant to tell time. The silver pocket watch rested inside an evidence bag on the hood of her patrol vehicle. She stared at it, then back at the lock. No. Professor Hart looked relieved. Good, Helen continued. Because whoever left this coffin expects us to... The cemetery bell suddenly rang. Once, its old bronze tongue hadn't worked in over 40 years. Walter slowly turned. I removed that bell rope myself. The bell rang again, twice. Then, a third time. Each chime echoed far longer than it should have, almost as though another bell, hidden somewhere underground, answered it. Deputy Cole's radio crackled. Static. Then a frightened voice. Dispatch to Sheriff Mercer. The signal broke apart. Helen, you need to... More static. Then, the church. Silence. Cole tried responding. Nothing. Every radio in the cemetery suddenly died. Every phone lost service. Even the satellite emergency unit displayed no signal. Walter quietly looked toward Bellweather. Smoke drifted above the church steeple. Not thick, not black. White, like dust. Helen immediately started toward the gate. "We're leaving." No one argued. Halfway down the cemetery path, Professor Hart stopped walking. Helen turned. "What is it?" Evelyn wasn't looking at the path. She was looking behind them, toward the 3 graves. Her face had become completely pale. "Helen, what?" "The graves." Everyone turned. The 3 coffins were gone. Not the graves. The coffins. Only 3 empty burial pits remained. The black coffin that had risen from beneath the oak had disappeared. Walter whispered, "It couldn't have." His sentence died unfinished. Fresh footprints crossed the wet grass, not approaching the graves, leaving them. 3 separate sets. One adult, one small child, all leading toward Bellweather Church. Helen knelt beside the smallest print. It wasn't muddy. It had been pressed into perfectly dry grass, as though whoever made it had never touched the rain. Professor Hart closed her eyes. "My grandmother wrote about this." Helen stood. "What did she say?" Evelyn answered without opening her eyes. "Never follow the footprints. After the 3rd grave." Deputy Cole looked toward the distant church. "They're heading there now." Silence. Helen looked down once more. The tiny footprints suddenly changed direction. Not toward the church, toward her, one after another. A child's footprints slowly appeared across the wet grass. No child was visible, only the impressions. They stopped exactly 1 foot in front of Helen. Then, a 4th grave marker slowly pushed itself up through the earth at her feet. No coffin, no mound of soil, only the stone, freshly carved. Its inscription contained just 5 words. "You were not fast enough." The 4th marker, no one spoke. The new gravestone stood silently at Sheriff Helen Mercer's feet. Its granite surface was flawless, fresh, untouched by moss or weather. 5 words had been carved so deeply they cast thin shadows despite the overcast sky. "You were not fast enough." Helen crouched beside it. She ran one gloved finger across the letters. The stone was warm, not from sunlight, from within. Walter Briggs stared in disbelief. "I've never seen granite feel warm." Professor Evelyn Hart didn't look surprised. She looked defeated. "It isn't warm," Walter frowned. "What? It has just been carved." Deputy Cole shook his head. "We've been standing here the whole time," Evelyn answered quietly. "I know." Helen looked back toward the invisible footprints. The child's trail had vanished, not faded, ended, exactly where the marker stood, as though whoever had walked there had become the stone. The cemetery bell rang again. One slow strike, then another. This time, the sound came from Bellweather Church, not Ashcroft Cemetery. Walter looked toward the distant steeple. It shouldn't ring. Why not? The church bell was removed in 1986. Helen immediately turned toward him. "Removed?" Walter nodded. The tower became unstable. The bell was taken down. He looked toward the church. There isn't one up there anymore, yet the ringing continued. Slow, measured. 6 chimes. Exactly 6. Then silence. Professor Hart suddenly gasped. "No." Helen looked at her. "What?" Evelyn's hands trembled as she counted under her breath. 1 grave. 2. 3. She looked toward the 4th marker. 6 bells. Walter frowned. "What does that mean?" Evelyn whispered. "The cemetery isn't counting graves. It's counting Sundays." Everyone froze. Helen slowly looked back at the first headstone. The silver pocket watch. October 13th. Exactly 1 week away. 6 bells. There would be 7 Sundays, just like 1912. Deputy Cole quietly spoke. "So, we've already lost." Helen turned sharply. "No, we're only on the first Sunday." Cole shook his head. "No." He pointed toward the 4th marker. "If 6 bells means 6 Sundays remaining," his voice grew quieter, "then we're already late." A cold wind swept across the cemetery. Every dead leaf lifted from the ground at once, not randomly. They circled the 4th marker. Faster, faster, until they formed a perfect ring around it. Then, every leaf dropped flat. Spelling one word. Church. Walter crossed himself. Professor Hart closed her eyes. Helen made her decision. "We're going." Bellweather Church stood less than 300 yards from the cemetery, built in 1879. Red brick, white steeple, narrow stained glass windows darkened by age. The front doors stood open. Neither Walter nor Evelyn remembered leaving them that way. Inside, everything appeared normal. Rows of wooden pews, simple altar, dust floating through colored light. No smoke, no bell, no people. Only silence. Deputy Cole called out, "Hello?" No answer. Their footsteps echoed across the stone floor. Helen walked slowly toward the altar, then stopped. Fresh mud covered the center aisle. Not footprints. Wheel tracks. Narrow. Parallel. As though something heavy had recently been rolled through the church. Walter stared. Coffin wheels. Everyone followed the tracks. They ended. At the altar, Professor Hart knelt. Her fingers brushed the stone floor. This wasn't here. She pushed harder. Something shifted. A square slab of limestone, hidden beneath an old carpet. Helen helped lift it. Cold air rushed upward. A staircase descended into darkness. Walter whispered, "I've been in this church 100 times. There was never a basement." Professor Hart quietly answered, "There wasn't." Helen shined her flashlight downward. Ancient stone steps disappeared beneath the church, carved into the first step, the same divided circle symbol. For the first time, it glowed, a faint silver light. Deputy Cole swallowed. "You still want to go down?" Helen nodded. "If the graves want us here." She looked into the darkness. "Then this is where the answers are." One by one, they descended. The temperature dropped with every step. The air smelled strangely clean, not damp, not moldy, like unopened rooms. After 32 steps, the staircase ended. Their flashlights revealed an enormous circular chamber beneath the church. No coffins, no bones, no crypts, only shelves. Hundreds of stone shelves carved into the walls. Each shelf held a single leather-bound journal. Thousands of journals. Every spine carried a year. 1887, 1903, 1912, 1948, 1976, 2026. Professor Hart's voice almost disappeared. "This isn't a crypt." Walter looked around in amazement. "What is it?" Before Evelyn could answer, Helen noticed one shelf standing completely alone. Unlike every other journal, it held only a small brass plaque. No book, no dust, nothing. The plaque read, "The story of the 7th child." Below it, 3 chilling words had been carved by hand, still unwritten. At that exact moment, one of the empty shelves behind them creaked. A brand-new leather journal slowly slid into place by itself, its cover embossed fresh golden letters. Sunday, 1. Then, without anyone touching it, the journal opened to its first page. Black ink began writing across the paper, by itself. The first sentence appeared in perfect handwriting. Sheriff Helen Mercer arrived exactly as expected, the journal that wrote the future. The words appeared one letter at a time. No pen, no invisible hand, only black ink flowing across yellowed paper. Sheriff Helen Mercer arrived exactly as expected. The four of them stood frozen. The sentence dried instantly. Then, another line slowly formed beneath it. She brought 3 witnesses. One will survive the 7th Sunday. Walter Briggs stepped backward. No. His voice cracked. I've seen enough. He turned toward the staircase. Only. The staircase wasn't there anymore. The circular chamber ended in solid stone. The entrance through which they had descended had disappeared. Deputy Cole ran to the wall. He struck it with the butt of his flashlight. Solid limestone. No hidden doorway. No echo. Nothing. We're trapped. Professor Evelyn Hart quietly corrected him. No. She stared at the journals surrounding them. We've been filed. Helen walked toward the open book. The ink had stopped moving. She carefully read the page again. Every word remained unchanged. Below it, a blank space waited, as though the story expected more. She reached toward the paper. The moment her fingertips touched the edge, the next sentence wrote itself. She does not yet understand that the first grave was never a warning. Helen immediately pulled her hand away. The writing stopped. Professor Hart approached slowly. It responds to you. Helen looked up. Why me? Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she searched the surrounding shelves. Years, hundreds of years. Some journals looked ancient enough to crumble into dust. Others appeared almost new. Then she froze. There. Walter followed her gaze. One journal stood alone. Its leather cover had faded almost completely. Embossed across the front, 1912. Evelyn carefully removed it. Dust drifted into the still air. She hesitated. I've searched my entire life. For this. She slowly opened the cover. The first page was blank. So was the second. Then, halfway through, writing finally appeared. Not printed. Handwritten. Messy. Hurried. Terrified. The first line read, If you're reading this, we failed. Walter swallowed. Who wrote it? Evelyn turned the page. At the bottom, a signature. Harold Mercer. Helen stared at the familiar name. Her great-grandfather. The sheriff who disappeared during the 7 Sundays of 1912. She read aloud. October 6th, 1912. The first grave appeared exactly where the old caretaker predicted. It was empty. Everyone laughed. By the 2nd Sunday, no one was laughing. By the 3rd, the cemetery began choosing names. If this journal survives, do not believe the graves are for the dead. They are not. They are for those who still have time. Silence settled over the chamber. Walter whispered, What does that mean? Evelyn slowly turned another page. The 4th grave changed everything. That was when we discovered. The graves do not predict death. They predict disappearance. Helen's heartbeat quickened. Disappearance, not death. 43 missing people. No bodies. No murders. Just gone. Deputy Cole suddenly looked toward the empty shelf where the new journal had appeared. Another leather book slowly slid into place. Fresh. Untouched. Its title read, Sunday 2. No one touched it, yet it opened by itself. The ink began writing. The sheriff has discovered the first truth. She believes there is still time. She is mistaken. Walter looked at Helen. It knows what we're doing. Professor Hart quietly nodded. No, it knows what we're going to do. The chamber suddenly trembled, not violently, softly, like distant thunder. One journal slipped from a high shelf. It struck the stone floor. Its pages burst open. Photographs spilled across the room. Old black and white photographs. Bellweather. 1912. Families, schoolchildren, Church picnics, Main Street, normal life. Walter picked one up. His hands immediately began shaking. What? Helen looked. Standing in the center of the photograph was Harold Mercer. Beside him, a young woman, 3 deputies, and a little boy no older than 8. Professor Hart stared at the child's face. "No." Walter looked at her. "You know him?" She slowly nodded. "I've seen him before." "Where?" Evelyn pointed toward the journals. "The 7th child." Helen carefully examined the photograph. Every face remained perfectly clear, except the boy's. Someone had scratched away every detail, not damaged by time, deliberately erased. Only one thing remained visible. Around the boy's neck hung a silver pocket watch, the same one found inside the first empty coffin. Deputy Cole whispered, "So the watch belonged to him." Professor Hart slowly shook her head. "Oh." She looked toward the open journal from 1912. It belonged to whoever was trying to remember him. Without warning, every journal in the circular chamber slammed shut at exactly the same moment. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Then, thousands of leather covers slowly began opening again, not randomly, to the same page. Every book, every year, every century, exactly one page, across thousands of journals. The same sentence had appeared, some in fading ink, some freshly written, some carved into the paper itself. Everyone identical. "Do not let the 7th child leave the church." Then, the lanterns lining the circular chamber extinguished one by one. Darkness spread around them. Only the page from Harold Mercer's journal still glowed faintly. A final line slowly appeared beneath his desperate warning, written in ink that looked impossibly fresh, as though someone had added it only seconds ago. "He's already outside." The child outside. No one moved. The final sentence glowed on Harold Mercer's journal. "He's already outside." Then, the light vanished. Complete darkness swallowed the chamber beneath the church. Only their breathing remained. Deputy Cole switched on his flashlight. Nothing. The batteries were dead. Walter tried his own. Dead. Helen reached for hers. A weak beam flickered, then disappeared. Professor Evelyn Hart whispered, "Don't panic." No one answered, because they all heard it. Footsteps, slow, measured, walking directly above them, across the church floor. One pair, small, bare feet. Tap, tap, tap. The sound stopped directly over the hidden chamber. Silence. Then, a child's voice. Soft, almost impossible to hear. "Are you still hiding?" Walter's entire body stiffened. "Did?" Helen nodded. "I heard it." No one spoke. The voice came again. Exactly the same. Exactly the same tone. Exactly the same words, as though repeating something said long ago. "Are you still hiding?" Professor Hart slowly closed her eyes. "My grandmother wrote about this." Helen looked toward her. "What did she say?" Evelyn swallowed. Never answer. The footsteps resumed, moving toward the front of the church, growing fainter. Until, nothing, without warning, every lantern fixed to the stone walls burst into flame, one after another. No matches, no fuel, blue fire, cold, silent. The circular chamber became visible once more. Thousands of journals surrounded them, every one now standing open. None contained writing anymore. Every page was blank, except one. The journal labeled Sunday 1 now contained another sentence. They ignored the first invitation. Beneath it, fresh ink continued flowing. "The child is now looking for another door." Walter looked toward Helen. "What invitation?" Professor Hart answered quietly. The voice. It wasn't asking where we were. It was asking whether we would answer. Helen looked around the chamber. "There has to be another exit." Deputy Cole nodded. "If the stairs disappeared, something else must open." Walter suddenly pointed toward the floor. The symbol, the divided circle emblem carved into the center of the chamber, was glowing brighter. Thin silver light spread outward through cracks in the stone, like veins or roots. The light slowly connected to 7 different walls. 7 narrow archways became visible. None had existed before. Above each arch, 1 Roman numeral appeared. Professor Hart's face turned white. 7 paths. Helen frowned. To what? Evelyn answered without hesitation. The 7 Sundays. Deputy Cole stepped toward the first archway. Instantly, the journal behind them wrote another sentence. Wrong door. Cole froze. The ink continued. He dies first in that version. Cole slowly backed away. No one laughed. No one questioned it. They simply accepted that whatever was writing the journals already knew every choice they might make. Walter approached the second arch. The journal wrote again. The caretaker disappears before sunrise. Walter stepped back immediately. Professor Hart moved toward the third. Fresh ink. She remembers too much. Helen looked toward the remaining 4. Each arch waited silently. No writing, no warning. Then, a sound echoed through every tunnel. Children laughing. Not happily, not cruelly. Simply playing. Dozens of voices. Some close, some impossibly far away, all echoing beneath the church. Walter whispered, "How many children?" Professor Hart interrupted him. There was only 1. Silence. Helen slowly turned. What? Evelyn looked terrified. My grandmother made one sentence perfectly clear. There was never more than 1 child. The laughter echoed again. This time, it came from all 7 tunnels at once. Helen stared into the darkness beyond Arch 7. Something moved. A silhouette. Small, perhaps 8 years old, standing perfectly still. Its face hidden in shadow. Around its neck, something silver reflected the blue flames. The pocket watch. The child slowly raised one hand, not waving, pointing, toward Helen. Then, the figure quietly whispered words that made Professor Hart collapse to her knees. You brought my family back. The child smiled. For the first time, its face became visible. Helen felt every drop of blood leave her body. Because the child wasn't a stranger, it had Helen Mercer's eyes, her smile, her face, only 114 years younger, and hanging from the pocket watch chain was a tiny brass key, exactly the shape of the lock on the ancient black coffin. The face in the darkness, Professor Evelyn Hart collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Her breathing became shallow. Her eyes never left the child standing beneath Arch 7. Helen reached for her. Evelyn. No response. Only one trembling whisper escaped her lips. It chose. Walter knelt beside her. What chose? Evelyn slowly pointed toward the child. It finally chose. Helen turned back. The child hadn't moved. 8 years old, barefoot, simple gray clothes that looked decades out of date. The silver pocket watch rested against his chest. The tiny brass key swung gently beneath it. Though there was no wind, the chain never stopped moving. Deputy Cole raised his flashlight. The beam flickered weakly. When the light crossed the child, it revealed something impossible. The child's shadow fell in the wrong direction, not behind him, toward Helen. Like darkness itself was reaching for her. The child smiled. Not cruelly, sadly. You came later than he did. Helen's voice remained steady. Who? The child tilted his head. The first sheriff, Harold Mercer. Walter slowly stood. You knew him. The child nodded. He almost remembered. Remembered what? The smile disappeared. My name. Silence swallowed the chamber. Helen carefully took one slow step forward. Tell me. The child's eyes filled with something resembling disappointment. You've already forgotten too. Behind them, the journal labeled Sunday 1 opened again. Fresh ink began racing across the page. Conversation has begun. History is changing. Professor Hart forced herself upright. Helen, she spoke sharply. Don't ask his name. Helen looked back. Why? Evelyn's face had become pale. My grandmother wrote only one thing in capital letters. She closed her eyes. Never ask the child his name. Helen immediately looked back. Too late. The child was already speaking. I used to have one. His small fingers wrapped around the silver pocket watch. But they buried it. Walter frowned. Names can't be buried. The child slowly looked at him. They can, when everyone forgets. The blue flames surrounding the chamber suddenly dimmed. One by one, several journals fell from their shelves. Their pages flipped wildly without wind. Photographs scattered across the floor, hundreds of them. Every photograph showed Bellweather. Different years, different generations, families, school classes, wedding portraits, military parades, church choirs. Helen quickly realized something horrifying. Every photograph contained the same child, always 8 years old, always standing in the background, always unnoticed. Professor Hart whispered, Impossible. Walter picked up another photograph. 1954. There he was. Another. 1978. Again. Another. 2003. Standing beside the cemetery fence. Never aging. Never changing. Always watching. Deputy Cole suddenly froze. He stared at one photograph so intensely that Helen noticed. What is it? Cole slowly turned it around. The date stamped along the bottom read, October 6th, 2025. Only 1 year earlier. It showed Bellweather's annual harvest festival. Crowds filled Main Street, children laughing, music, food stalls. In the background, Helen herself stood talking with townspeople. Only a few feet behind her, the same child watched silently. Holding the silver pocket watch, Helen's face drained of color. I was there. Walter looked closer. You never saw him? Oh, I swear, I never saw him. The child quietly answered. No one ever does, until they are supposed to. Another sentence appeared inside the journal. Recognition complete. The fourth marker has accepted her. Without warning, the tiny brass key detached itself from the pocket watch. It floated gently through the air. No strings, no force anyone could see. It stopped directly in front of Helen, hovering, waiting. The child spoke softly. It opens the truth. Professor Hart shouted, No! Her voice echoed through the chamber. If she opens that coffin, the child interrupted her. The story ends. Walter looked confused. Isn't that what we want? The child slowly shook his head. Oh, the story ends. His eyes locked onto Helen's. But Bellweather doesn't. Silence. Helen stared at the floating key. Every instinct told her not to touch it. Yet something deeper, something impossible to explain. Felt familiar, like remembering a dream she'd forgotten years ago. Slowly, she reached out. The brass key settled gently into her palm. The instant her fingers closed around it, every journal in the chamber slammed shut. The blue flames vanished. Complete darkness returned. Then, a single voice echoed through the chamber. Not the child's, not anyone present. An old man's voice. Tired, broken, filled with regret. Harold. I finally remember his name. Professor Hart gasped. No. Helen whispered. That was my great-grandfather. Then the voice spoke one final sentence. The sentence Harold Mercer had apparently spent his entire life trying to remember. If anyone remembers the seventh child, he becomes real. The name that should never be remembered silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that seemed to erase every sound beyond the walls of the hidden chamber. Helen Mercer still held the tiny brass key. It had become strangely warm in her hand. Almost like a heartbeat. Walter Briggs spoke first. If remembering him makes him real. He looked toward the child. Then what has everyone been seeing all these years? The child smiled faintly. A memory. Not me. Professor Evelyn Hart slowly stood. Her breathing remained uneven. My grandmother was wrong. Helen looked at her. What do you mean? Evelyn stared at the child. She believed remembering him would release him. The child quietly answered. It does. Deputy Cole suddenly stepped between Helen and the child. No one says another word. No names. No questions. We leave. He turned toward the staircase. The wall behind them had changed again. The hidden exit had returned. Stone steps stretched upward toward the church. Open. Waiting. Walter sighed with relief. It's letting us go. The child slowly shook his head. No. It's letting one of you leave. Nobody moved. Then, a soft creak echoed above them. The sound of an old wooden door opening. Footsteps. Adult footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Walking across the church floor. Not one person. Several. Helen instinctively drew her sidearm. Who's up there? No answer. Only slow footsteps. Circling. Searching. Deputy Cole rushed halfway up the stairs. He carefully pushed the stone hatch open just enough to look through. His face immediately lost all color. He slammed the hatch shut. Locked it. Then leaned against it, breathing hard. Walter grabbed his shoulder. What did you see? Cole swallowed. Us. Silence. What? I saw us. Helen frowned. That's impossible. Cole shook his head. They're standing inside the church. 4 people. They look exactly like us. Professor Hart whispered. The replacements. Walter looked confused. What replacements? Evelyn closed her eyes. My grandmother mentioned them once. They arrive after the 4th marker. They leave the church, so no one notices the real people disappeared. Nobody spoke. The implication settled over the chamber like cold fog. 43 missing townspeople. No panic. No investigation. Because someone had gone home in their place. The journal labeled Sunday 2 suddenly opened. Fresh ink flowed rapidly. The copies have awakened. Do not allow them to leave Bellweather. Helen stared at the page. What are they? The child answered softly. They're what people remember. Walter frowned. I don't understand. The child looked at him with genuine sadness. When someone is forgotten, something has to take their place. A loud bang shook the stone hatch above them. Once, then again. The people upstairs were trying to get in. Deputy Cole pressed harder against the hatch. They know we're here. Another bang. This one stronger. Tiny fragments of stone drifted from the ceiling. Helen looked at the child. You could stop this. The child nodded. I could. Then, why don't you? His answer came without hesitation. Because no one stopped mine. Professor Hart suddenly remembered something. The church. Everyone looked at her. My grandmother wrote about a bell. Walter frowned. There isn't a bell anymore. There used to be. Evelyn nodded rapidly. The bell wasn't removed because the tower was unsafe. It was removed because it rang by itself. Helen looked toward the ceiling. The 6 bells. Evelyn's eyes widened. It wasn't counting Sundays. It was warning the town. Every time the bell rang, someone had already been forgotten. The child slowly closed his eyes. You finally understand. Helen stepped closer. You weren't buried. No, you disappeared. Yes, they forgot you. The child nodded. One by one. My parents first. My teacher. My friends. My own brother. His voice became almost inaudible. Then, I forgot myself. The blue flames burst back to life, brighter than ever. Every journal flew open simultaneously. This time, not one sentence, thousands. Names, dates, entire lives. Every missing resident of Bellweather. Each page belonged to someone who had vanished. Each story ended the same way. Remembered by no one. Walter's eyes scanned one open journal, then another. Suddenly, he stopped breathing. No, Helen hurried over. The journal before him was new. Its leather wasn't aged. Its pages weren't yellow. The title read, Walter Briggs, not 1912. Not 1887.2026. Walter slowly opened it. Every page was filled. His childhood, his marriage, his years caring for Ashcroft Cemetery. Everything. Down to this very moment. Only the final page remained unfinished. At the bottom, fresh ink began writing. Sunday, 2. Walter Briggs returns home. No one recognizes him. Walter's hands trembled violently. No, another line appeared. By sunrise, Walter Briggs has never existed, before anyone could react. A deafening crack echoed through the chamber. The stone hatch exploded inward. Dust filled the air, silhouetted against the daylight above. 4 figures slowly descended the staircase. Sheriff Helen Mercer, Deputy Nathan Cole, Professor Evelyn Hart, Walter Briggs. Perfect, expressionless. Their identical copies had found them, and each copy wore one tiempos terrifying difference. Around every neck hung a silver pocket watch, all ticking in perfect unison. The ones who were remembered, the 4 identical figures descended the staircase in perfect silence. Each step landed at exactly the same moment. Not one moved faster than another. Not one blinked. The silver pocket watches hanging around their necks ticked together. Tick, tick, tick. The sound echoed through the underground chamber like a single heartbeat. Walter Briggs stared at his own face, every wrinkle, every gray hair, every scar. Perfect. The only difference, his double had no reflection in the polished brass journals lining the walls. Deputy Cole slowly raised his pistol. Helen. She didn't answer. She couldn't stop looking at the copy wearing her own face. It stood calmly, hands folded behind its back, watching her with empty eyes. Almost waiting, Professor Hart whispered. Don't shoot. Cole frowned. They're not people. Evelyn shook her head. No. But the chamber won't know the difference. The child standing beneath Arch 7 quietly spoke. They're what the town remembers. Walter looked at him. What does that mean? When someone disappears, people still remember talking to them, seeing them, hearing their voice. The child lowered his eyes. The cemetery keeps those memories alive. Helen finally understood. The copies aren't replacing us. The child nodded. They already have. Silence. The words settled over the chamber like ice. The journal labeled Sunday 2 opened once more. Fresh ink flowed across the page. Only one version may leave the church. Cole immediately looked toward the staircase. If they get outside first. Professor Hart finished the thought. Everyone will believe they're the real ones. Walter slowly backed away from his own copy. The duplicate smiled. Exactly the way Walter smiled in old family photographs. Gentle, kind, completely wrong. Then, the duplicate Walter spoke. Not with Walter's voice, with the voice of Walter's late wife. I've been waiting for you. Walter froze. No. Tears filled his eyes. Mary? The copy smiled wider. I missed you. Professor Hart shouted, Walter, it's lying! But Walter had already taken one step forward. Then another. Across the chamber. Helen's duplicate finally spoke. Its voice belonged to Helen's father. Dead for 16 years. I'm proud of you. Helen's breath caught. She hadn't heard that voice since his funeral. The duplicate took one slow step toward her. You don't have to keep carrying this anymore. Deputy Cole's copy remained silent. Until it spoke with the unmistakable voice of Cole's younger brother, killed during military service. I waited. Cole lowered his pistol. His hands trembled violently. Professor Hart was the only one whose duplicate never spoke. Instead, it simply watched her, smiling, as though it already knew something. The child sighed sadly. They always choose the voices you'll follow. Helen forced herself to look away. They're not real. The duplicate tilted its head. Neither are memories, but you still cry when you remember them. Walter stopped walking. Only a few feet separated him from Mary's face. His copy extended one hand. Come home. Walter reached toward it. Suddenly, Professor Hart grabbed Harold Mercer's journal from the floor. She ripped out the final handwritten page. The chamber shook violently. Every duplicate turned toward her at once. For the first time, their expressions changed. Fear. Helen shouted, "Evelyn!" Professor Hart ignored her. She unfolded the page. I never understood why Harold left this unfinished. Her eyes scanned the faded handwriting. Then she smiled. He didn't. On the back, hidden beneath faded ink, another message appeared, invisible until now, written in dark red. Not ink. Blood. Harold Mercer's final words. If they begin speaking, do not answer. If they wear familiar faces, do not follow. If they remember your grief, close your eyes, because they cannot cross. A forgotten name. Walter frowned. A forgotten name? Professor Hart looked toward the child. Then, toward the silver pocket watch hanging around his neck. Her eyes widened. Oh, Helen looked at her. What? Evelyn whispered. The cemetery isn't powered by death. It's powered by memory. The child slowly smiled. For the first time, it looked hopeful. Professor Hart turned toward him. I know what they stole. The child's eyes filled with tears. You do? She nodded. They didn't erase your life. They erased your name. Silence. The duplicates all took one step forward together. The journals around the chamber began slamming shut, one after another. Boom, 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 like a countdown. Professor Hart clutched Harold Mercer's page tightly. Helen, we've been trying to stop the graves. She looked directly into Helen's eyes. We've been fighting the wrong battle. Helen frowned. What do we fight? Professor Hart slowly pointed toward the ancient black coffin hidden beneath Ashcroft Cemetery. The lock, the key, the name inside. She took a slow breath. I don't think the coffin is meant to imprison the child. Another journal burst open by itself. Fresh ink appeared across both pages in enormous black letters. It imprisons whoever remembers him. At that exact moment, the tiny brass key in Helen's pocket became so hot, she cried out in pain. She instinctively dropped it. Instead of striking the stone floor, the key landed upright, balanced impossibly on its tip. Then, without anyone touching it, it slowly rotated until it pointed directly toward Arch 7, where the child had been standing only seconds earlier. He was gone, and somewhere deep within the darkness beyond the arch, a little boy quietly whispered Helen's name as Arch 7. The whisper echoed through the darkness, Helen. Soft, gentle, impossible to locate. The child was gone. Only the endless black corridor beyond Arch 7 remained. The brass key still stood upright on the stone floor, pointing directly into the tunnel. No one moved. Deputy Cole finally broke the silence. This is exactly what it wants. Professor Hart nodded. Yes. Helen looked at her. So why does Harold's key point there? Evelyn's answer came almost immediately, because Harold wanted someone to finish what he couldn't. Walter slowly picked up the brass key. It was no longer hot. Instead, it felt strangely cold, almost frozen. As soon as he touched it, the journals lining the walls rustled softly, thousands of pages turning together, like a forest moving in the wind. One sentence appeared simultaneously inside every open journal. The caretaker now holds the choice. Walter stared at the words. I don't want it. He tried placing the key back on the floor. It wouldn't leave his hand. His fingers refused to open. The brass key had somehow fused against his palm. Professor Hart whispered, "The chamber chooses." The duplicate, Walter smiled, using Mary's voice once more. You always carried everyone's burdens. Carry one more. Walter squeezed his eyes shut. I know you're not Mary. The duplicate took another step. No. But I remember how she loved you. Walter didn't answer. A tear rolled down his cheek anyway. Helen turned toward Arch 7. The darkness seemed different now. Not empty. Watching. Waiting. Then, another whisper. Not from the child. From somewhere much farther away. Please. The voice belonged to a little girl. Then another. An old man. A young mother. Dozens of voices. One after another. We're still here. Don't leave. Remember us. Professor Hart slowly covered her mouth. The missing. Walter looked horrified. The 43. Evelyn nodded. They were never buried. They were trapped. Suddenly, every journal bearing a missing person's name slid from its shelf. 43 books landed in a perfect circle around Helen. Each cover carried only a name: Samuel Brooks, Margaret Ellis, Thomas Reed, Anna Whitlock, Harold Mercer. 43 lives. 43 stories. Only one journal remained missing. Its empty place on the shelf seemed darker than everything around it. Above it, a brass plaque. Unknown child. Helen frowned. They remembered everyone except him. Professor Hart looked toward the empty shelf. No, they couldn't. Someone erased him first. The duplicate Helen stepped forward. For the first time, its empty eyes showed emotion. Fear. It looked toward the empty shelf, then quickly away. Almost as though it wasn't allowed to look. Helen noticed. So that's what scares you. The duplicate smiled weakly. If he remembers himself. Its voice suddenly distorted. Multiple voices speaking together. None of us survive. Deputy Cole raised his pistol again. Then maybe that's exactly what we need. He fired. The shot echoed through the chamber. The bullet passed directly through his duplicate. Not slowing, not striking flesh. Instead, it shattered one of the journals on the shelf behind it. Leather exploded. Pages scattered into the air. Every page instantly turned blank. Then, a scream. Not from the duplicate. From somewhere deep inside Arch 7. The voice of an elderly woman. Crying. Begging. Then abruptly. Silence. Professor Hart gasped. No! She ran to the ruined journal. Its title had vanished. The name was gone. Every page empty. Walter looked at her. What happened? Evelyn slowly looked up. You didn't destroy a book. You erased someone. Cole's face drained of color. Professor Hart nodded sadly. The journals aren't records. They are what's left. No one spoke. The duplicates smiled. All four of them. At exactly the same time. The chamber had just lost another memory. Then, the child spoke again. His voice echoed from somewhere inside Arch 7. You understand now. Helen stepped toward the darkness. What are you? Silence. Then, I was the first. The first what? The first person. Everyone agreed to forget. The blue flames surrounding the chamber suddenly stretched upward, not burning, pointing. Every flame leaned toward Arch 7, the same direction as the brass key, the same direction as the whispers, the same direction as the missing socio shelf. Professor Hart slowly opened Harold Mercer's final page once more. This time, tiny words appeared along the torn edge that had been invisible before. She read them aloud. There is no monster beneath Bellweather. There is only a promise. Every 114 years, one child must be forgotten, so everyone else can remain remembered. Walter whispered, "My God." Helen looked at the childless darkness. So the town sacrificed him. Professor Hart nodded, and every generation since has unknowingly protected that lie. At that exact moment, the church bell rang again, not 6 times, not 7, only once. The single note rolled across Bellweather like distant thunder. Every duplicate immediately froze. Their smiles disappeared. Then, cracks began spreading across their faces, thin at first, like porcelain. The child spoke one final sentence before the chamber shook violently. "They've realized. Someone finally remembered me, and deep within Arch 7, a pair of small footsteps began running toward them. The child who was chosen. The footsteps grew louder, fast, light, bare feet striking ancient stone. Tap, tap, tap. They echoed through Arch 7 until the child emerged. Not walking, running, straight toward Helen. Deputy Cole instinctively raised his pistol. "Stop!" The child never slowed. Helen stepped in front of him. "Don't shoot!" The boy stopped only a few feet away. His chest rose and fell rapidly. For the first time, he looked frightened, truly frightened. Not of them, of something behind him. The chamber shook again. A deep crack split the ceiling. Dust rained onto the stone floor. Every journal trembled violently on its shelf. The duplicates turned toward Arch 7 together. For the first time, their empty expressions became panic. The duplicate Helen whispered, "He's remembering." The child looked directly into Helen's eyes. "They're awake." "Who?" He slowly turned toward the darkness behind him. The ones who agreed. Then they heard it. Not footsteps. Dragging. Slow. Heavy. Like dozens of people pulling chains across stone. One sound became 2. 2 became 10. Then 43. Exactly 43 separate dragging sounds approached through Arch 7. Walter whispered, "The missing." Professor Hart shook her head. "No." Her voice trembled. "The ones who made the promise." The child clutched the silver pocket watch around his neck. "They don't want me remembered." Helen knelt beside him. "Who are they?" His answer froze everyone. "The founders of Bellweather." The dragging stopped. Complete silence. Then, one figure slowly stepped out of the darkness. An old man, black suit, dust-covered boots. His skin looked pale as old paper. His eyes, completely white. No pupils, no iris, only white. Behind him, another figure emerged. Then another. Men, women, a preacher, a doctor, a schoolteacher. 43 silent townspeople. Everyone dressed in clothing from 1912. Everyone wearing a silver pocket watch. None casting a shadow. Professor Hart recognized the first face immediately. She nearly collapsed. "No." Helen looked toward her. "You know him." Evelyn nodded slowly. "My grandfather." Walter frowned. "But he disappeared." "Yes," she whispered. "He never died." The wide-eyed figures formed a circle around the chamber. None spoke. None blinked. They simply watched the child, like judges waiting to deliver a sentence. Finally, the oldest man stepped forward. His voice sounded dry, ancient. "We remember the agreement." The child quietly answered, "I never made it." The old man nodded. "No. Your father did." Helen frowned. "What agreement?" The old man slowly turned toward her. His wide eyes somehow found hers. Bellweather should never have survived. Silence. We were starving. The mines had collapsed. Disease followed. There was no future. He looked toward the child. Then we were offered one. Walter whispered. Offered by who? The old man's expression never changed. The cemetery. Professor Hart slowly shook her head. No, the old man continued. One forgotten child. For 114 years of prosperity. Deputy Cole shouted. You sacrificed him? No, the old man corrected quietly. We sacrificed memory. Helen looked down at the boy. Your parents. The child lowered his eyes. They cried. They begged. But once everyone forgot me, they forgot crying too. The chamber trembled again. Cracks spread across every journal. The duplicates staggered backward. Their bodies were beginning to fracture like cracked porcelain. The old man looked toward Helen. The agreement is breaking. Because someone remembered. Professor Hart slowly stepped forward. It wasn't just someone. She looked at the child. It was all of us. For the first time, the 43 wide-eyed figures hesitated. Their perfect formation broke. Several looked at one another, almost uncertain. Then, a deep rumble echoed beneath the chamber, not from Arch 7, from below. Far below, the ancient black coffin beneath Ashcroft Cemetery had finally opened. The sound reached them like a giant iron door swinging inward after more than a century. The child closed his eyes. Too late. Helen whispered. What was inside? The child slowly opened his eyes. Tears filled them. Not what? His voice cracked. Who? At that exact moment, the silver pocket watches worn by every white-eyed figure stopped ticking together. One by one, they all turned toward the darkness beyond Arch 7, not with fear, with reverence. Then, a single pair of footsteps echoed from somewhere impossibly deep below the church. Slow, adult, deliberate. Whoever had been locked inside the black coffin was walking toward them. The man from the coffin. The footsteps echoed beneath the chamber. Slow, measured. Each one sounded older than the church itself. No one dared move. The 43 white-eyed figures lowered their heads together. Not in fear, in respect. The child beside Helen began trembling. Not because he was cold, because he knew exactly who was coming. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, a man emerged from the darkness beyond Arch 7. He looked no older than 50, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long black coat untouched by dust. A silver pocket watch rested against his chest. Unlike every other watch, its hands were still moving. Tick, tick, tick. His eyes were not white. They were dark, completely black, not empty, endless. Professor Hart gasped. No, Walter whispered. Who is he? The child answered without looking up. My father. No one spoke. Helen stared at the man. You've been inside the coffin? The man slowly nodded. For 114 years, his voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. Deputy Cole raised his weapon. Stay where you are. The man looked at him once. Cole's arm immediately dropped, not by force, by choice, as though every instinct told him fighting was meaningless. The man stepped into the center of the chamber. The brass key in Walter's hand suddenly vibrated. The silver pocket watch around the child's neck stopped ticking. Every journal opened. Thousands of pages turned by themselves. Only one line appeared. The keeper has returned. Helen frowned. The keeper? The man looked at her calmly. That is what they called me. My real name, he paused, was taken. The child quietly whispered, they took yours too. The man smiled sadly. They had to. Professor Hart slowly understood. The town didn't sacrifice one child. The keeper nodded. No, they sacrificed an entire family. Silence. My wife, my son, my own name, so Bellweather could survive. Walter looked horrified. They buried all of you in memory. No, the keeper corrected gently. They buried everyone else's guilt. The 43 white-eyed founders finally spoke together. One voice, 43 mouths. The agreement preserved the town. The keeper turned toward them and destroyed your souls. The chamber shook violently. Cracks raced across the ceiling. Blue fire erupted from every archway. The duplicates screamed, not in pain, in terror. Their porcelain skin shattered. Fragments fell away, revealing nothing underneath, only drifting ash. Within seconds, all 4 duplicates collapsed into piles of gray dust. Gone. Deputy Cole stared. So they were never alive. The keeper answered, they were memories without truth. Helen stepped closer. If you're free now, can this end? The keeper remained silent for a long moment. Finally, no. Why? Because the agreement was broken. He looked toward the child, but never replaced. Professor Hart whispered, so another child. The keeper closed his eyes. Will be chosen. The child immediately stepped backward. No. Helen instinctively placed herself between the boy and the founders. No one touches him. The 43 founders raised their heads together, their wide eyes fixed on Helen. Then, every one of them slowly pointed, not at the child, at Helen. Walter frowned. What are they doing? The keeper's face lost all color. No. Helen looked at him. What? He spoke barely above a whisper. They aren't choosing him anymore. They're choosing you. The journals exploded open. Fresh ink flooded every page. Not one journal. All of them. The same sentence appeared across thousands of books. The sheriff has been offered the bargain. The brass key suddenly slipped from Walter's hand. It floated through the chamber, straight toward Helen, stopping inches before her chest. The keeper spoke urgently for the first time. Don't touch it. Helen kept her hands at her sides. What happens if I do? The keeper answered with quiet certainty. You'll save Bellweather. She looked at the child. And him? The keeper slowly lowered his eyes. You'll become the one everyone forgets. Silence. Then, the church bell rang again. Not once, not twice, 7 times, each chime louder than the last. On the 7th, every journal in the chamber flipped to its final page. Every page was blank, except one. Helen's. Across the empty paper, a single line slowly wrote itself. Will Sheriff Helen Mercer choose the town, or choose the truth? The sheriff's choice. No one spoke. Helen's journal remained open before her. The single sentence shimmered across the final page. Will Sheriff Helen Mercer choose the town, or choose the truth? The brass key hovered silently in front of her, waiting, patient, almost alive. Walter Briggs looked at Helen. Don't answer. Deputy Cole nodded. If this place feeds on choices, don't give it one. Professor Hart slowly shook her head. It already has. Everyone looked at her. The question wasn't asked to hear her answer. It was asked because the chamber already knows she can. The keeper stood perfectly still. His black eyes never left Helen. I've watched this moment once before. Helen frowned. When? He smiled sadly. When they asked me. Silence. You accepted? I refused. Walter looked confused. Then why were you locked inside the coffin? The keeper answered quietly. Because someone else accepted. Helen slowly turned toward the 43 founders. Who? The oldest founder stepped forward. The sheriff. Harold Mercer. No, not the Harold who disappeared. The sheriff before him. Bellweather's very first lawman. His white eyes never blinked. He chose the town. He became forgotten. We survived, Professor Hart whispered. So this has happened. More than once. The keeper nodded. Every cycle. Every 114 years. The keeper refuses. The sheriff decides. The realization struck Helen like ice. She had never been chosen because of her bloodline. She had been born into a role repeated across generations. The sheriff, the keeper, the forgotten child. The same story. Again and again. The child quietly stepped beside Helen. You don't have to save me. Helen looked down. I know. I've already disappeared. You still remember? He smiled faintly. For now. Suddenly, the silver pocket watch around the child's neck cracked. A thin fracture spread across the glass. Tick, tick, tick. Its rhythm faltered. The keeper's expression hardened. We're running out of time. Professor Hart hurried to Harold Mercer's journal. She flipped frantically through the remaining pages. Blank, blank, blank. Then, one folded sheet slipped free, hidden inside the back cover. Unlike everything else, it wasn't handwritten. It was a map. Bellweather, Ashcroft Cemetery. The church. 7 circles connected by narrow lines. At the very center, a single symbol, not the divided circle, a complete one. Whole, unbroken. Walter frowned. What is that? The keeper stared at the map. His face changed. Hope, for the first time in over a century. No. Professor Hart looked at him. What? He whispered. Harold figured it out. Helen studied the map. The circles. They aren't graves. The keeper nodded. They're memories. She looked again. The center. It isn't a place. No. It's a person. The child slowly lowered his eyes. Professor Hart finally understood. The 7th child was never the sacrifice. The keeper smiled sadly. He was the lock. Silence. The forgotten child doesn't imprison the curse. He keeps it asleep. Walter stared in disbelief. Then, if everyone remembers him. The keeper finished quietly. The agreement dies. The founders disappear. The copies vanish. The cemetery loses its power. Deputy Cole frowned. That sounds like exactly what we want. The keeper looked at him. It is. Cole blinked. Then what's the problem? The keeper's voice became almost inaudible. Someone must replace the lock. Every journal in the chamber suddenly began burning, not with orange flames. Blue, cold, silent. Names vanished from page after page. Ink dissolved into ash. Professor Hart shouted, "The memories!" The keeper nodded. The chamber is deleting itself. The child looked at Helen. I know who it wants. Helen already knew. She didn't answer. The child gently reached into his pocket. He removed something small, folded, yellowed, a single photograph. He handed it to Helen. It showed a family standing beside Ashcroft Cemetery in the summer of 1912. A father, a mother, a smiling little boy. For the first time, the child's face had not been scratched away. On the back of the photograph, written in faded pencil, were 8 simple words. Our son, Benjamin Carter, age 8, never forgotten. Helen felt her heart stop. Benjamin. After 114 years, the 7th child finally had a name again. The instant she silently read it, every pocket watch in the chamber stopped. The 43 founders screamed together. The stone walls cracked from floor to ceiling, and somewhere far above them, every church bell in Bellweather began ringing at once. Benjamin Carter, the name echoed through the chamber, not spoken aloud, not whispered, simply remembered. Benjamin Carter. For 114 years, no living soul had carried those 2 words together, until now. The effect was immediate. Every silver pocket watch shattered. Glass exploded across the stone floor. The ticking stopped forever. The 43 founders staggered backward. For the first time, fear filled their white eyes. The oldest founder looked directly at Benjamin. No. Benjamin slowly raised his head. My name, his voice trembled, is Benjamin. The sound rolled through the chamber like thunder. One by one, the journals burst open, not with new writing, with old, entire pages that had been blank suddenly filled with ink. Birth certificates, school records, Drawings, letters, birthday cards. Every memory of Benjamin Carter flooded back into existence. Walter picked up a loose page, a childish drawing, a small family holding hands beneath a large oak tree, signed in crooked handwriting. Ben. Walter's eyes filled with tears. He was real. Professor Hart nodded. He always was. We were the ones who weren't. The chamber shook violently. Massive cracks split the ceiling. Stone rained down around them. The blue flames surrounding the 7 archways turned bright gold. The keeper quietly smiled. It begins. Helen looked toward him. What begins? The truth. The oldest founder screamed, "Stop remembering him!" His voice was no longer human. It cracked like breaking stone. The other 42 founders repeated the command, together, louder. Their bodies began flickering. Parts of them disappeared, then returned, like fading photographs. Benjamin stepped forward. No. His voice remained calm now. You forgot me, but I never forgot you. The founders froze. Benjamin slowly looked at each face. I remember every one of you. The baker, the preacher, the doctor, the sheriff, the teacher. My mother begged you. My father pleaded. You watched. You signed the agreement. You chose silence. The oldest founder covered his ears. Enough! Benjamin shook his head. Now, you remember too. Instantly. Every founder cried out in agony, not because they were being harmed, because they were remembering. The forgotten cries, the frightened child, the grieving parents, the promise, the lie. 114 years of buried guilt returned in a single heartbeat. Professor Hart whispered. The curse, the keeper nodded. It was never punishment. It was denial. Then, something impossible happened. The white eyes of the founders slowly regained color. Blue, brown, green, gray, one after another. They became human again. Old, broken, ashamed. The oldest founder fell to his knees before Benjamin. Tears rolled down his weathered face. We were afraid. Benjamin answered softly, I know. We thought saving the town, Benjamin gently interrupted, was worth losing one child. Silence. It wasn't. The journals stopped burning. Fresh pages appeared. Not stories. Obituaries. 43 of them. Each founder's life. Each ending with the same final sentence. He finally remembered. The keeper looked toward Helen. The agreement is ending. She frowned. So no one has to replace Benjamin? The keeper didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the center of the chamber. The complete circle on Harold Mercer's map had begun glowing. Brilliant white. Professor Hart suddenly gasped. The lock! Walter turned. What? She pointed. It was never Benjamin. Everyone followed her gaze. The glowing circle surrounded. The keeper. His expression became peaceful, almost relieved. Benjamin looked at his father. Dad, the keeper smiled. I told you. They took my name, too. Helen slowly understood. Benjamin wasn't the lock. No. The keeper nodded. I was. I chose to enter the coffin, so my son might someday be remembered. Benjamin's eyes filled with tears. You lied. The keeper smiled gently. I promised I'd come back. I never said when. The chamber trembled one final time. The glowing circle beneath the keeper expanded, slowly surrounding his feet. His body began turning transparent, not painfully, peacefully. Benjamin rushed forward. No! The keeper knelt before his son for the first time in more than a century. He gently placed one hand on Benjamin's shoulder. You remember me now. Benjamin nodded through tears. I do. The keeper smiled. Then I don't need the coffin anymore. He slowly leaned forward and whispered something into Benjamin's ear. No one else heard the words. Benjamin closed his eyes. Tears streamed down his face. When he looked up again, the keeper was gone. Only the silver pocket watch remained, resting quietly on the glowing stone, its cover slowly opened by itself. Inside, for the first time, a name appeared. Jonathan Carter. The keeper, finally, had his name returned. The last bell. No one spoke. Jonathan Carter's silver pocket watch rested alone on the glowing stone. The chamber had become strangely peaceful. For the first time since Helen entered Ashcroft Cemetery, there was no ticking, no whispers, no unseen footsteps, only silence. Benjamin slowly picked up his father's watch. The moment his fingers touched it, the golden light surrounding the chamber softened. The violent shaking stopped. Dust settled. The cracks in the walls no longer spread. It was as though the church itself had taken a long, exhausted breath. Professor Evelyn Hart quietly wiped away tears. He kept his promise. Benjamin nodded. He always intended to. Walter looked around the chamber. So, it's over? No one answered. Because the journals had begun changing again. Every leather-bound volume opened to its final page. One by one, the words that had filled them for generations slowly faded away. Names disappeared. Dates vanished. Entire lives dissolved into blank paper. Helen frowned. We're losing everything. Professor Hart gently shook her head. No. We're not losing them. She smiled sadly. We're setting them free. The first journal crumbled into fine white dust. Then another. Then another. Hundreds. Thousands. Every record created by the cemetery was quietly disappearing. The curse had preserved memories unnaturally. Now, those memories no longer belonged to the chamber. They belonged to the people who remembered them. The 43 founders stood together in silence. Their white eyes were gone. Their faces looked tired, human, ashamed. The oldest founder slowly approached Benjamin. His hands trembled. I cannot ask for forgiveness. Benjamin looked at him for a long moment. You can't. The old man lowered his head. I know. Benjamin quietly continued, but I won't carry your guilt anymore. The founder closed his eyes. A peaceful smile crossed his face. For the first time in 114 years, he simply whispered, "Thank you." His body dissolved into tiny particles of light. Not ash, not dust, light. The particles drifted upward, passing through the stone ceiling, vanishing into the world above. One by one, the remaining founders followed. The preacher, the doctor, the teacher, the sheriff. 43 souls quietly disappeared. No screams, no fear, only acceptance. Walter watched the last light fade. I thought justice would feel louder. Professor Hart answered softly. The greatest justice usually doesn't. Only 4 people remained inside the chamber. Helen, Cole, Walter, Professor Hart, and Benjamin. Benjamin looked toward the shelves. Every journal had vanished. Only one remained. A brand new leather book. Its cover was completely blank. No year, no title, nothing. Helen picked it up carefully. The first page contained only one and a written sentence. Every story deserves to end where the truth begins. She turned the page. Blank. Every page after that. Blank. Walter smiled. So, no more stories? Professor Hart quietly laughed. No, there are always more stories. She closed the journal. But this place won't be writing them anymore. Suddenly, the church bell rang. Once, a clear, beautiful tone. Nothing like the haunting bells they had heard before. Walter frowned. I thought the bell was gone. Professor Hart smiled. It is. Outside. Morning sunlight poured through the cracks in the ceiling. For the first time, real sunlight. Warm, golden, alive. They climbed the staircase together. This time, nothing disappeared. Nothing shifted. The stone hatch opened normally. Fresh October air greeted them. The church stood exactly as it should. Quiet, peaceful, ordinary. Helen stepped outside first. She stopped immediately. Ashcroft Cemetery lay before them. Every fresh grave had vanished. The 4 mysterious headstones were gone. The cracked earth had healed. Only rows of ordinary graves remained, as though nothing had ever happened. Walter slowly walked toward the great oak tree. The hidden marker beneath the leaves was gone. No sign it had ever existed. Benjamin stepped out into the sunlight. He closed his eyes. The warmth touched his face. He smiled. "I don't remember." Helen looked at him. "What?" He slowly opened his eyes. What sunlight felt like. At that exact moment, a small girl riding her bicycle along the road stopped beside the cemetery fence. She looked directly at Benjamin, then waved. "Hi." Benjamin froze. The little girl smiled again. "Are you new in town?" Benjamin looked toward Helen. Tears filled his eyes. Someone had seen him, not as a ghost, not as a memory, as a little boy. Real, alive, remembered. And somewhere high above Bellweather, the final bell echoed once, then never rang again. 1 year later. Bellweather changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, quietly, the way healing always does. The newspapers never reported strange graves. No one wrote about haunted churches. There were no government investigations, no television crews, nothing. To the outside world, Bellweather remained an ordinary Ohio town. Yet the people who lived there noticed small things. Flowers placed on forgotten graves never withered as quickly. The church felt warmer. Children laughed louder in the cemetery than they ever had before. And for reasons no one could explain, nobody hurried when walking past Ashcroft anymore. The fear had disappeared. Walter Briggs still cared for the cemetery every morning. Only now. He unlocked the gates with a smile. The old oak tree stood proudly beside the northern wall, healthy, strong. Its roots no longer cracked the earth beneath it. Walter often paused there before beginning his work, not because he expected something to happen, but because it reminded him that even the oldest wounds could finally rest. Professor Evelyn Hart donated every page of Harold Mercer's recovered journal to the Bellweather Historical Society, not as evidence of the supernatural, as history, real history. The names erased for more than a century finally appeared where they belonged. School records, town registries, family trees. Among them, one new entry had been added. Benjamin Carter Horn, 1904. Remembered. Forever. Deputy Nathan Cole changed in ways even he couldn't explain. He stopped avoiding memories of his younger brother. Instead, he spoke about him, shared old photographs, told stories, laughed. For the first time in years, grief no longer felt like something that had to remain silent. Sheriff Helen Mercer often returned to the church alone. She never entered the hidden chamber again. Because there was no hidden chamber anymore. The stone beneath the altar had become solid. The staircase had vanished forever, as though it had completed the only purpose it had ever existed to serve. Only one thing remained, the blank leather journal. Helen kept it locked inside her office desk. She opened it every Sunday morning. Every page remained empty, year after year, until exactly 1 year later, October 13th. The first page changed, not with black ink, with blue. One sentence slowly appeared. "Thank you for remembering us. Nothing more. No warning, no prophecy, no names. Just gratitude." Helen smiled, closed the journal, and it never wrote again. Benjamin Carter never left Bellweather. The town officially adopted him. Records that had never existed somehow appeared in state archives. Birth certificates, school enrollment forms, medical files, everything necessary for a little boy to finally have a life. No one questioned where the documents came from. It simply felt right. Benjamin grew older, for the first time. 9, 10, 11. Each birthday proved the impossible. Time had begun moving again. One autumn afternoon, Helen found him sitting beneath the great oak at Ashcroft Cemetery. Sketching. "What are you drawing?" Benjamin smiled. "My family." She sat beside him. He showed her the picture. His mother, his father, himself, and 3 more people. Helen, Walter, Professor Hart, all standing together beneath the oak. Helen laughed softly. "You gave me gray hair." Benjamin grinned. "You'll earn it." The wind rustled through the branches. Leaves drifted gently across the old cemetery. No whispers followed. No footsteps echoed. Only birds. Only life. Benjamin suddenly looked toward Helen. "Do you ever wonder why it chose us?" Helen thought for a long moment, then smiled. "I don't." "Why?" "Because I think." She looked across the peaceful cemetery. "We chose each other." Benjamin nodded. "I like that better." As the afternoon sun began to set, a little girl from town ran through the cemetery chasing a red kite. She stopped beside Benjamin. "Come on, we're playing by the river." Benjamin stood. He looked back at Helen. "Can I go?" Helen smiled. "Of course." Benjamin ran after the children, laughing. Just another boy, exactly as he should have been 114 years earlier. Helen watched until they disappeared beyond the hill. Then she quietly whispered, "Goodbye, Jonathan." A warm breeze passed through the cemetery. The great oak shed a single golden leaf. It drifted gently into Helen's hand. Nothing more. No voices. No signs. Just peace. For the first time, Bellweather finally belonged to the living. The memorial 5 years passed. Bellweather no longer feared Sundays. Children played among the old maple trees at Ashcroft Cemetery. Families visited loved ones without hurrying away before sunset. The cemetery had become what it was always meant to be, a place for remembrance, not fear. Walter Briggs finally retired at the age of 73. On his final morning as caretaker, the entire town gathered beside the great oak tree. Not for a funeral, for a dedication. A small granite monument stood where the first mysterious grave had once appeared. Unlike the old headstones, its inscription was simple. In memory of those who were forgotten and those who chose to remember below it. 45 names. The 43 missing townspeople. Jonathan Carter, Benjamin Carter. For the first time in history, every one of them stood together. No names hidden, no pages erased. Walter smiled as he ran his fingers across the stone. Now they're finally home. Professor Evelyn Hart nodded. They always were. We were the ones who finally arrived. Benjamin was 13 now, taller. His laughter came easily. His nightmares had almost disappeared. Almost. Some memories never vanished completely. Nor should they. They reminded him that surviving carried its own responsibility. To remember. Helen Mercer remained sheriff. Bellweather had become one of the safest towns in Ohio. Not because evil no longer existed, but because people had learned something simple. Silence protected lies. Truth protected people. Each October 13th, the town gathered beneath the great oak. No speeches, no ceremonies, just names. Every child in Bellweather took turns reading them aloud. One by one. Slowly. Clearly. So no one would ever be forgotten again. One autumn evening after the memorial, Benjamin lingered beneath the oak after everyone else had left. Helen noticed. "You okay?" Benjamin smiled. "I was listening." "To what?" "The wind." Helen laughed softly. What did it say? Benjamin looked toward the fading sunset. Nothing. He smiled wider. And that's wonderful. Helen understood immediately. The whispers were gone. Forever. As they walked toward the cemetery gate, Benjamin suddenly stopped. Near the old fence, a little boy about 6 years old stood quietly watching them. Helen hadn't seen him arrive. He wore a blue jacket and held a small wooden toy boat. When Benjamin waved, the little boy waved back, then ran toward his waiting parents outside the gate. Completely ordinary, completely real. Benjamin smiled to himself. Every child deserved to grow up remembered. That night, Helen opened the old blank journal one last time. The pages remained empty, except tucked inside the back cover. She discovered something she had never noticed before, a faded family photograph. Jonathan Carter, his wife, young Benjamin, all smiling beneath the great oak tree. On the reverse side, only one handwritten sentence, not supernatural, not mysterious, simply human. The only thing stronger than fear is being remembered by someone who refuses to let you disappear. Helen carefully placed the photograph back inside, closed the journal, locked the drawer, and never opened it again. Outside. The church stood silent beneath the stars. No bells rang. Ashcroft Cemetery rested peacefully beneath the moonlight. And somewhere beyond memory, a father and his son finally walked home together. Every Sunday, 20 years later, visitors often stopped in Bellweather on their way through Ohio. Most came for the covered bridge, some for the autumn leaves. A few wandered into Ashcroft Cemetery simply because it looked peaceful. None of them knew its history. That was intentional. The town had decided long ago. Some stories were not meant to become attractions. They were meant to become lessons. Walter Briggs had passed away peacefully 3 winters earlier. His funeral was held beneath the great oak, exactly where he had wanted, on his gravestone. Only 6 words were carved. He remembered everyone who needed remembering. No dates, no titles, no praise. Nothing more was necessary. Professor Evelyn Hart lived long enough to finish one final book. Not about ghosts, not about curses. About Bellwether's forgotten families. Every copy was donated to the local library. The first page carried a dedication. To every name, history almost erased. The book quietly became required reading in Bellweather High School. Every student learned the same lesson. History is not only what survives, it is also what someone chooses not to forget. Sheriff Helen Mercer eventually retired. On her final day, the new sheriff asked if there was anything unusual he should know about Ashcroft Cemetery. Helen smiled. Yes. He waited. She looked toward the great oak swaying gently in the breeze. Take care of the people. The dead will take care of themselves. That was all she ever said. Benjamin Carter grew into a kind, thoughtful man. He became Bellwether's history teacher. Every autumn, he brought his students to the cemetery, not to frighten them, to introduce them. He walked slowly among the old stones, reading names aloud, telling stories, making strangers into people, because he understood better than anyone. That remembrance begins with a name. One crisp Sunday morning, many years after everything had ended. Benjamin arrived before sunrise, just as Walter once had. The cemetery was quiet. Golden leaves covered the paths. The great oak stretched peacefully into the brightening sky. He smiled. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then, he noticed something. A little girl stood near the memorial stone, perhaps 7 years old. She carefully traced the engraved names with one small finger. Benjamin walked over. "Good morning," she smiled politely. "My daddy says everyone here has a story." Benjamin nodded. He was right. The little girl looked up. "Did you know them?" Benjamin looked at the 45 names carved into the granite. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled. "Yes, I remember every one of them." The little girl smiled back. "That's nice." She ran toward her parents waiting near the gate. Benjamin watched until they disappeared down the hill. Then he looked once more at the memorial. A warm breeze passed through the cemetery. The great oak shed a handful of golden leaves. They drifted gently across the stone. No whispers, no bells, no mysterious graves. Only sunlight, only memory, only peace. Benjamin quietly spoke the words his father had once whispered before disappearing into the light. No one is forgotten. Far above Bellweather, church bells from neighboring towns echoed faintly through the morning air. Ashcroft's bell remained silent. It never rang again, because it no longer needed to. The town had finally learned the promise that broke every curse. A person truly disappears only when no one remembers their name. And in Bellweather, every Sunday, someone still walked through Ashcroft Cemetery, reading the names aloud, not out of fear, but out of love.